but I forgot the power supply.
Oh, so you have to be...
Shoot out there, and they're going to shoot out the bathroom window too, kind of.
Okay. So you can move it back and forth.
Yeah.
Is it still centered? How's it look?
Good.
Is it still
So are they
centered?
coming in?
Yeah, I see, so I wanted to go over to my trees. It's going to show the wall.
You can actually. Ready? Yeah, but I don't slam around like Craig does. He's not really thinking about his audience. He's just thinking about his.
I opened your window back up, Craig.
Oh, good.
How's it look, Jessica?
Good. I can't center it too much because it's going to take the wall.
Yeah. That's when we cut, break to another shot. Like that one with the black sails. It looks like it's.
Looks like it's higher security.
Is it ready to go there yet?
No, it's good.
Okay. Oh, it is good. He must be slowing down.
That one right there looks like it has giant
Well,
hands.
that's kind of neat. Because it looks like he's just.
Witness the mountains of the Penobscot, against whose feet doth beat the sea. Well, I wonder if he walked the breakwater out here with that in mind. Those of you that walk out here at high tide, your feet doth beat the sea graphically. And, those of you that walk that breakwater, it's a great, great walk, a whole mile out here to get to this lighthouse. But isn't it wonderful they perched this lighthouse out at the end of this fantastic breakwater? Wonderful, wonderful place, Penobscot Bay. Only one place in the world where you can come and see all of these beautiful harbors of the Americas and all of these wonderful schooners, these old retired schooners. Well, they've changed their career. They used to be cargo vessels, but now they're carrying passengers in a wonderful way all along the coast of Maine. It's the best way to see Maine. You can drive around Maine by automobile for days and days and weeks, but you can't see half as much as you would see in an old schooner out on the bay here. I've been around these harbors and these bays for about 55, 60 years now. These magnificent little harbors, there's just nothing like it anywhere else in the world. Rockland Harbor was discovered by George Weymouth way back in the 1600s, 1605. And he came sailing up through here, and a few years later, Samuel Champlain came up and discovered these little harbors all along Penobscot Bay. He drew maps of Norumbig, as he called it, and it was Penobscot Bay as we know it, the coast, these little harbors. He marked them out one after another, explored Rockland Harbor. Back in those days, without a breakwater, it was quite an open harbor, but still it was a center of sail. The vessel approaching us now, coming in with a nice breeze of wind, a great long pennant hanging from her topmast, is the schooner Isaac Evans, giving us a blast on the horn. Two-masted vessel, two-masted schooner, with a single topmast aft, dressing her mastheads. The Isaac Evans was built in 1886 in Morristown, New Jersey, built for oystering, the oyster business down in New Jersey. And wonderful, wonderful vessel. Today she's known as among the fleet for family-oriented cruises operated by Captain Brenda Thomas. There's Brenda right at the wheel there. Give her a big cheer. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Welcome to Rockland, the Isaac Evans, schooner Isaac Evans, with all her flags flying and her little yawl boat tucked up under the stern there. She doesn't have an engine in her, as most of these old vessels don't have engines in them. Some of them have had engines put in them, but the original old vessels were engineless, and they remain engineless to this day.
Yeah, that's why I put that there.
So many people ask me, what's a schooner anyway? How do you know a schooner? Well, a schooner has the small mast. A quick answer is the schooner has the small mast forward and the little mast aft. And that's the configuration. They have a couple of jibs usually out on the end of a bowsprit or up in the forward end of the vessel, and they have a foresail right in the middle of the hull, and then they have a big mainsail back aft. And that's the way you'll see most of these vessels coming at us now. There are more different kinds of schooners than just one, though, with a little mast forward and a big mast aft. There are three-masted schooners. There are four-masted schooners. There are five-masted schooners. There are six-masted. There's even a seven-masted schooner that was built way back in 1900. 7 masts, and think of all the sails in a vessel like that. The Thomas W. Lawson was her name. She was made of steel because she was 400 feet long. She was much too big to build out of wood. A wooden vessel, when it got that big, when it got over about 350 feet, they would chew themselves up carrying cargo. They just had too much flexibility out in the seaway, and they would, what they call, chew their oakum. Their seams would start to work against each other, and they would leak terribly. So when a vessel got over that size, that was a 6-masted size, the only 7-master they ever built was made of steel, and it was the only way to build a vessel that big. I'm looking out over there, and I see a 3-masted vessel, Can you see that three-masted vessel with all those sails and a great big American flag flying aft? She's an icon here in Rockland Harbor. She's the largest commercial sailing vessel in the Windjammer fleet and in the United States. She's the only three-masted commercial vessel in the United States. She's the Victory Chimes. The Victory Chimes was built in 1900 back in Delaware, in Lewes, Delaware, and she was known as a Chesapeake Ram. Those vessels, there were about a dozen of them built altogether. These rams, they were of a particular model to carry cargo up and down the Chesapeake Bay. And coming along to the left of the Victory Chimes, we have schooners and schooners and schooners. What is it with all these schooners here? The Maine Windjammer Association. This is the driving force of this event. Maine Windjammer Association. The Windjammer fleet out of Maine. They're comprised of a dozen or 14 vessels. Amazing, amazing vessels. This is the only place in the world where you can come and find an array of schooners like this, engineless schooners, schooners that carry passengers. You can go to Holland and they have their brown fleet over there, but those are mostly all steel vessels and they all have engines in them. Here in the United States, these are vessels that were cargo vessels, that were commercial vessels. Back in the old days, they carried cargo on them way back. Here comes the Lewis R. French, with two topmasts, three headsails, one foresail, one mainsail. You can tell that schooner rig, the big mast aft and the little mast, the shorter mast forward. She's carrying her yawl boat up under the stern there on davits. She has no engine in her. She was built in 1871 down in Christmas Cove right here in Maine. Amazing vessel. Garth Wells, usually her captain, but today we have a stand-in Captain Danny Pease. Hello, Captain Danny Pease. Let's give the Lewis R. French a cheer. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Welcome to Rockland Harbor, Lewis R. French. She carried bait, she carried fish, she's carried all kinds of general cargo, and a terrific vessel. Now look behind her. Look at this cunning little vessel with a great big whiskers under her chin there. She's got a bone in her teeth, if any of them do. The schooner Stephen Tabor, flags a flying. She again was built in 1871. Two vessels built back in the 1800s. The schooner Stephen Tabor, wonderful, wonderful little historic schooner. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Captain Noah, good to see you, Captain Noah. Welcome, Captain Noah Barnes. Welcome to Rockland Harbor. Wonderful little schooner, the schooner Stephen Tabor. I owned her way back in the 1960s. I owned her then when she leaked copiously. Now she's been all rebuilt, and my goodness, what a beautiful vessel she is. She's painted up to the nines, and she's maintained without regard to expense. She's maintained just as fine as Noah Barnes can do, and he does a fantastic job of it. And following along behind is the schooner Victory Chimes. The Victory Chimes, built in Bethel, Delaware, built for the Chesapeake Delaware Canal. Back in those days they had a lock in the Chesapeake Delaware Canal. She was built to carry cargo, mostly lumber, but general cargo of all kinds. She carried from boot heels to cargo hats. Anything. She carried lumber, she carried manure, she carried fertilizer, she carried everything you can think of through the Chesapeake Delaware Canal, back and forth from Philadelphia down the way. She's the largest vessel. She's 140 feet long, three-masted schooner. There's the foremast, the mainmast, and the mizzenmast. Three great big sails there, fore, main, and mizzen, and three headsails up there. Captain Paul DeGatta. Captain Paul DeGatta, give us a wave with your hat there, Captain Paul. There you go, there you go, Captain. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Schooner Victory Chimes with her yawl boat hanging along behind her. She's a centerboard schooner. She has a board that goes down in the middle of her that helps maintain her headway and keeps her from slipping sideways. Wonderful vessel. And here, coming along, dark vessel, sleek looking vessel, kind of flat sheer, racy looking little two-master. She's got masts almost of the same size, but you can see the foremast is just a little bit shorter than the mainmast. The J&E Riggin. J&E Riggin, she's another oyster boat. Delaware Bay oyster boat, and she was the queen of the fleet down in the oyster fleet of the Delaware Bay. She was one of the fastest vessels there. She frequently would go down the bay with her yawl boat hoisted when all the other vessels had their yawl boats down and pushing. She was built in Dorchester, New Jersey, 1927 for the dredging trade, oyster dredging trade. And her speed in the '89 schooner race run first of the the first and only schooner race, formal oyster schooner race ever held on the Delaware Bay. In 1974, she was brought to Maine and rebuilt extensively for the windjammer trade, owned and operated by John Finger and Annie Malley. The Riggin is a national historical landmark, just as most of these vessels are. Now, we talked about schooners. Here comes another beautiful little schooner along here, the schooner Heron. The Heron runs day sails out of Rockport Harbor. The Heron was, she's family rebuilt and owned, operated by Twig and Bonnie Bauer. They live aboard, and they have two girls that with them. She sails Penobscot Bay, and in the winter they go to the Caribbean. She's a beautiful, beautiful Alden designed vessel, and Twig and Bonnie built it and rebuilt this vessel themselves. Magnificent schooner. She's a two-masted schooner. You can see the small mast forward and the big mast aft, but she doesn't have a gaff rig on her mainsail. She has what they call a jib-headed sail, or a Marconi sail. That has a little pointed end on the top of that mainsail, whereas you can see on the fore, she's got a gaff rig on the fore, which is the more traditional kind of rig. Two headsails. She's a very sleek schooner. And now behind her, well, here comes the vessel with dark red sails. My gosh, that's pretty impressive. Dark red sails. These are what they call tan bark sails. Well, they used to be tan bark sails. This represents tan bark sails. Tan bark was a process they used when they had canvas sails. They used the bark of a tree, and it turned the sails red, but it kept the moisture from collecting in there and creating mold and deteriorating the canvas sails. So this vessel is rigged with tan bark sails so that it looks traditional. But look at the mast. She's got her big mast forward and a little mast aft. She looks like a schooner going backwards. Well, it isn't quite, but this is a ketch rig. She's built a ketch rig built from a typical Brixham trawler type. Captain Dennis Gillant at the wheel there. Captain Dennis, give us a wave. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray for the Angelique. Welcome Angelique to Rockland Harbor. Angelique was built of steel, designed by a man named Amiro Gobato. Amiro Gobato was an artist, a local artist, a very talented local artist from Camden. And he was also a naval architect. She was built to represent the vessels in the North Sea fishing vessel. Schooner Stephen Tabor working her way out again. And the little boat, there's a sloop going by, and we have another ketch out beyond, and a friendship sloop out beyond that. We talk about rigs and schooner rigs, and we talk about wonderful schooner rigs, that multi-masted schooner rigs. Well, of course, there are all kinds of other rigs. People ask me what the difference is between a schooner and a clipper ship. Well, there's quite a lot of, there's a vast difference between a clipper ship and a schooner. But we better start at the beginning. At the beginning, the simplest form of a sailing vessel is a single-masted vessel. But there are several different kinds of single-masted vessels. There's a sloop, and there's a cutter, and there's a catboat. Well, the catboat is the most simple of all. A catboat has a single mast, forward, way forward, up in the eyes of the vessel, and just one mainsail, one main sail on the whole boat. And a catboat is a very, very handy little boat. They were developed prolifically in Cape Cod. Cape Cod catboat is one of the most common, and very old design. And then from there we go to a sloop. A sloop is a single-masted vessel with a jib, usually a jib and a mainsail. Usually one jib. Sometimes they have more than one jib. But a sloop has the mast set in the forward end of the vessel, but not quite so far up in the bow as a catboat, but more or less in the middle of the forward part of the vessel. And then the other single rig would be a cutter. A cutter has a mast put in just about in the center of the boat. Usually has 2 or more headsails and a single mainsail. Here comes the Lewis R. French again, gliding by. Built in Christmas Cove, 1871. Traditionally painted, her gray topsides and that pretty red waist. You can see the vessels are painted up beautifully. They're well maintained. The captains are very proud of these vessels. Most of these vessels are owned and operated by their captain. This awesome Windjammer fleet, there are more vessels coming in the Maine Windjammer fleet here. This fleet left over from the Camden Windjammers. The Camden Windjammers were first started in 1936 by a man named Frank Swift. Frank Swift looked at all these old schooners after the Depression, and they were laying around in the coves here and there. Laying around in the coves, they didn't have any work. He could buy one of these boats for $200 or $300 back in those days. $200 or $300, including the sails and all of their gear. And the captain didn't have anything to do either, so he would go along just for the ride for the same kind of a modest amount. Here goes the Isaac Evans, little yawl. There's a little Hinkley yawl here is being blanketed by the Isaac Evans, and he's got a little trouble there. He's losing his air and being sucked in alongside under the vacuum created behind the Isaac Evans. Kind of scared him a little bit. A yawl is another rig. There's a ketch, which you saw in the Angelique, and then a yawl looks very much like it. A yawl has the little mast aft, the little small mast way aft behind the rudder post. The yawl rig is a nice handy rig because in a storm you can take the mainsail down and you have just the headsail and that little mizzen way back aft, and it balances out pretty well. Schooners parading back and forth here. As I say, 1936, Captain Frank Swift started this business in Camden. He started out buying these old vessels for a few $100s, putting passengers in them. They were very modest back in those days. They didn't have any fancy accommodation in them. They would just dust them out and put up hammocks and put in bunks most anywhere. They may have had a bucket behind a curtain. Sometimes they probably didn't have a curtain. But that's the way they did it back in those days. They'd have a face pan of water, they'd come up on deck and they'd brush their teeth and spit overboard. But it was a very viable business back in those days. As I say, 1936 he started out with a vessel. He had 18 different vessels during his career. He sailed 12 of them at one time out of Camden Harbor. 12 of them going in and out of Camden Harbor. This was Depression days. He was making money running these old schooners on coastal cruises. Brand new kind of idea, Windjammer cruise. Windjammer, there's a name for you. Where did the name Windjammer come from? Well, Windjammer came from way back in the old days when they had big square rig vessels that were going back and forth from the Far East into England, up through the English Channel, and these great big old vessels would come along under sail and they would be passing the steamships at that time. Well, the sailing vessels had the right of way and the steamships had to stay out of their way. So the captains would say, God, here comes another one of these darned old windjammers. We got to get out of the way. So it was a derogatory term back in those days. Nowadays, of course, they call most anything, the big vessel with sails on it, they call them windjammers. Well, this is the Windjammer fleet of Maine. Look at this vessel coming in now. My gosh, great, big, beautiful schooner here with 2 topmasts. Flags are flying. 3 headsails. She's got a main gaff topsail, on her main, over her mainsail, and beautiful racing stripes down the sides. This is the Schooner Heritage. Schooner Heritage makes her home right here in Rockland, right in the north end of Rockland. Captain Doug and Linda Lee, they have a north end shipyard, and that's where this vessel was built in 1983. Heritage was built with a tradition of a 19th century coasting schooner. She's got a bone in her teeth, sailing along beautifully there. And just under her lee is a little friendship sloop, a little single-masted vessel with a single topmast, cute little boat going along in her lee, kind of blanketed. But Captain Doug Lee there at the helm. Captain Doug Lee, give us a wave of your hat there so we can see you. There he is, waving his hat. Welcome to Rockland Harbor. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Welcome, Heritage, to Rockland Harbor. He and Linda Lee, Doug Lee and Linda Lee, built that vessel themselves by their own hand right there in the north end of Rockland. Clever guy. He did his own ironwork. We gotta wait till this noisy lobster bait boat gets by here. I don't know why they can't put mufflers on lobster boats like most other boats. He probably has a motorcycle ashore. Here comes the Stephen Tabor back again. Stephen Tabor is a wonderful little vessel. She's a centerboard boat. She only draws 5'2", 5'2" of water to make her float. She's 68 feet long on deck, 22 feet wide, carries 22 passengers. And a lot of captains have cut their teeth on the schooner Stephen Tabor. As I say, I owned her back in the 1960s, and she was my first windjammer in Maine. I worked on other boats here in Maine, but the first windjammer that I owned in Maine, schooner Stephen Tabor. Way back, Stephen Tabor, of course, built in 1871. She was built in Glenwood Landing, New York. She was built as a North River brick schooner. She carried sand, cement, and brick to help build New York City on the Hudson River. She actually was built, we suspect, as a Hudson River sloop because her mast partners around her foremast are enormous. And around the mainmast, they're normal. But back in those days, that was frequently the case. They would take a sloop, Hudson River sloop, and they would put another mast in it and make a two-masted schooner out of it because they had to pay crew back in those days, and it took more crew to handle a big mainsail on a sloop rig than it did to handle the smaller sail plan on a schooner. So the Stephen Tabor was changed into a schooner before her launching, and the Stephen Tabor during her years, of course, had been rebuilt a couple of times. She was rebuilt way back in the 1800s one time, and she became rebuilt once in the early 1900s. She became the first windjammer. Actually, they rebuilt her and they fitted her out to carry passengers long about 1905 on Long Island Sound. So she was one of the first passenger windjammers ever. Then she was rebuilt again by Fred Wood up here in the coast of Maine, and rebuilt again by the Barnes family. So she's had a number of major rebuildings. However, she's still probably 30 or 40% original. Her original keel, her original planking below the waterline. These vessels, old schooners, they rot out above the waterline where the fresh water gets at them. And they don't rot out underneath down in the salt water, because the salt is a preservative and it preserves the plankton down there. They go a long time. Victory Chimes, built in 1900, she's probably still 70% original. She's just tacking out there now. You can see her pointing up into the wind. She's getting over on the other board. She's going to come this way very shortly again. Rockland Harbor is an amazing harbor. You see all the parade of sail out here now. All these magnificent vessels. There goes the ferry boat over to Vinyl Haven or North Haven, one or the other. That's a fantastic ride. If you want a good ride, take the ferry boat from Rockland over to Vinyl Haven or North Haven. It's a beautiful, beautiful ride among the islands over there, especially on a day like today. The little vessel just abreast of us here, a little friendship sloop, single-masted vessel with her boom one way out. She's off the wind there, a little bit of a jib up forward. She's coursing along almost at hull speed. These little sloops are coming to Rockland Harbor for their rendezvous the end of this week, the 17th. They have a big race here in Rockland Harbor, and many of the friendship sloops that are left in the world are right here in Rockland Harbor for this race. There are frequently 100 of them. They're like little butterflies all over the bay here. We have a little yacht approaching now, a little fiberglass yacht. She's a sloop. She's got a big genoa up forward and a mainsail. Their genoa is almost bigger. Well, it is probably bigger than her mainsail. She's typical of the modern yachts nowadays. In the old days, Rockland was an amazing harbor, as I say. In the late 1800s, Rockland was the 4th largest seaport in the United States. That's hard to believe. The 4th largest seaport in the United States was Rockland because of the commerce here. Rockland had amazing amount of commerce. With the lime rock industry, the granite industry, fishing, and everything else, vessels came in and out of Rockland Harbor by the thousands, by the tens of thousands. So many large sailing vessels. These vessels back in those days carried all the commerce that built this great nation. US 1 came right along the coast up here by all the lighthouses from New York to Eastport. Every time you see a 18-wheeler on the turnpike, you think back in the old days, that was a 4-masted schooner or a 3-masted schooner running the coast here from New York, down east, down to Eastport, and up to New York and up to Boston. And that's, of course, determined by the prevailing wind. But those 3- and 4-masted schooners would be delivering cargo up and down all along the New England shore. You see a UPS truck, every time you see a UPS truck, you think about it, that was a 2-masted schooner back in the old days. They would go in and out of the little tiny villages all along the coast, the little harbors. They would go in at high water, they would tie up to the pier, they would let the tide fall out, they would unload their cargo, and then when the tide came, they'd load another cargo and go off to another seaport. Back in those days, literally thousands of vessels came by Owl's Head Light. There were so many that the lighthouse keeper could hardly count them all. And from these vessels, that's what we have here in Rockland. These commercial vessels there in Rockland that carried the cargo back in those days that built our great nation. We have another little schooner approaching, from seaward here. A little white schooner. She has just 4 sails and a nice angle of heel there. Her passengers are getting a thrill there. You get a vessel like that and you get a breeze of wind in it, that vessel heels over and you can feel the horsepower develop in those sails. You can feel her surge ahead. Standing up here on this lighthouse, we don't get much of a thrill out of it. Sometimes you think these sailboats move so slowly, it's like watching grass grow. But when you're on deck and you feel the wind in those sails and you feel the vessel surge ahead, you get quite a kick out of that. That is a real thrill. This little white schooner here is the schooner Olad. She's from Camden. She's a day sailor out of Camden, and she's down on a visit. Schooner Olad. I sailed next to the schooner Olad back in the 1950s down in the Bahamas. Schooner Olad. Aaron Lincoln is the skipper. Aaron, are you? Hey, Aaron, wave your hat to us or something here, will you? Schooner Old Lad. You can see that pretty little round cockpit she has there. All the passengers can sit around in there. Commodious little thing. Sails 2-hour sails out of Camden Harbor. So if you want to take a nice little voyage out of Camden, pretty little schooner to go on. Here comes that Hinckley yawl again. We talked about the yawl with a little mast back aft. And here, coursing right up off of the rocks, is the schooner Heritage again. Captain Doug Lee. Hello, Captain Lee. He's got his yawl boat up on the Davis there. Beautiful vessel. You feel the blanketing. You feel the wind stop when she goes by. Took all the air away from us.
What a sight.
And the victory chimes again. The victory chimes, built in 1900, 3-masted schooner. She has a fore, a main, and a mizzen mast. And Captain Kip Files is usually the captain, but today it's Paul DeGatta. Captain Paul's got her today because Kip Files is down running the Charles Morgan, the whaler out of Mystic Seaport. They got him to take her on her cruise, New England cruise, when they just finished a major rebuild on that vessel, the Charles Morgan. The Victory Chimes is a 3-masted vessel and has a fore, main, and mizzen mast. Sometimes they call the last mast aft the spanker mast. And it really depends on the skipper. The skipper calls him as he sees him, calls him as he wants to. They say different long splices, different captains, and the captain runs the ship the way he wants to do it and can name the mast the way they want to do it. The Angelique going by again with her tan bark sails. Angelique sails out of Camden on regular weekly cruises. Captain Dennis Gallant. Dennis worked at the world-famous Sail Power and Steam Museum for me for the last 5 years. You've heard of the world-famous Sail Power and Steam Museum, certainly, on the south end of Rockland. That museum is Rockland's finest maritime museum. South Rockland's finest maritime, there's no question about it. You've got to come down and see that museum. We have wonderful things going on at the Sail Power and Steam Museum. We miss Dennis. He just bought the Angelique this year. It was owned by Mike McHenry before. Mike McHenry worked for me many years ago, back in the 1960s in Camden, when I had my schooners up in Camden. And again, here comes the Isaac Evans with a big bone in her teeth, coursing along through the water. It's amazing. These vessels go by without a sound. All you hear is the wind in the rigging. You hear the sounds of the sea. You don't hear engines. You don't hear any of that kind of thing. It's part of the charm of taking a windjammer cruise. Captain Brenda there
The child.
with a little one. Little green friendship sloop. Another little green friendship sloop coming by, getting ready for the friendship sloop races this coming weekend. So what do you do when you have a 4-masted schooner or a 5-masted schooner? How do you name the masts on that? That's quite different. Well, you always start with a 4. That's easy. The foremast, and then the mainmast always follows. The mainmast comes next, and then from there on it's anybody's guess. Either a mizzen or a spanker. Sometimes it's a jigger. Sometimes it's a driver, a pusher. And it really depends on the captain. The 6-masted schooners, 7-masted schooners, how do they name all those masts? Well, the 7-masted schooner would be named fore, main, mizzen, jigger, driver, pusher, spanker. However, one of the captains decided he was not going to remember all those darn fool names. He named it the days of the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. He used to tell his crew, well, go up forward, put a reef in Monday, and take down Tuesday, and clew up the topsail on Wednesday. Well, it was a different way of doing it, but that's the way he did it. The schooner Stephen Tabor going by again, headed out for another pass. The schooner Stephen Tabor was brought to Maine by Fred Guile, Board Guile, and he back in the 1950s maybe, sold the vessel to Buds Hawkins. Hal Hawkins, he was an icon from Sedgwick, Maine. He sailed out of Camden for years and years and years. He had the schooner Stephen Tabor for 10 years, and he bought the Alice Wentworth towards the last of his career with the Tabor. He owned both Wentworth and the schooner Stephen Tabor, and he owned the Wentworth for about 4 years. He bought that from Boyd Guile as well. And then he sold them both when he built the Mary Day, schooner Mary Day. She'll be along here pretty soon, I believe. Schooner Mary Day was built for this trade along about 1963. And she's a beautiful vessel with 2 topsails. Don't see her yet on the horizon, but she's a pretty swift vessel, and she may be stomping across here just at any time. We'll keep our eye out for her anyway. I'm Capt Jim Sharp. I'm going to take a little break here, and I'll be back. Don't go away. Don't change that channel. This wonderful event, amazing, awesome event here on the coast of Maine. Sponsored by the Maine Windjammer Association. The Maine Windjammer Association, all these great schooners that run the coast of Maine and carry passengers on marvelous vacation all around the islands, around the coast here. These old vessels, they're just the same as our forefathers. They're most of them are owned and operated by their owner, and they're fabulous vessels. They're commercial schooners, and all the tasks, most of the tasks are done by hand. They don't have any winches. They don't have any power. These are old canvas sails. These are hempen rigging and oakum seams, the kind of thing that our forefathers did. And you'll see passengers joining in, doing things as our ancestors did, swabbing the deck and taking a trick at the wheel, hauling on the halyards, raising those sails, heaving up the anchors, all these things that they do for the most part. These vessels are all floating, living, operating museum pieces. Some are open for inspection on the weekends. You can go aboard and see what they're like, see their accommodation, and see how they feed all of these people. The food is wonderful on these vessels. You can't begin to go on a windjammer cruise without coming back gaining a little bit of weight. But it just falls off when you get back into civilization. This is just schooner weight, you know. There's vessels that were built here for this trade, such as the Mary Day and the Heritage, and the Angelique. The Angelique was built for this trade as well. See, it was actually built of steel in Florida, but those vessels built for this trade are evidence that there is certainly a market to continue this kind of vacation cruise, this kind of windjammer cruise along the coast. We have another new arrival sneaking in under the lee of these other vessels here. The vessel furthest to the right looks like the American Eagle. She's a bald-headed schooner. They say a schooner without a topmast is bald-headed. She just has pole masts like the Victory chimes, a bald-headed mast, no topmasts. She has a beautiful sheer. She's gray in color, and it's the American Eagle. Captain John Foss's vessel, the American Eagle. She's a Gloucester fishing schooner. As my old Adventure, I had the schooner Adventure. She was a Gloucester fishing schooner. The Gloucester boats were wonderful, wonderful fishing vessels. They fished on the Grand Banks during the winter time and in the bad weather, in some of the worst sea conditions in the world out on the Grand Banks. But they're a breed of cat like the Blue Nose. Wonderful vessels, shapely vessels, and very swift vessels. The American Eagle was built in 1930 and was the last Gloucester fishing schooner built in Gloucester, Massachusetts for this trade. She fished there for 53 years before becoming a windjammer. She's another National Historical Landmark, as most all of these vessels are. She's owned and operated by Captain John Foss, who completely rebuilt this vessel when it came to Maine. Completely did the whole vessel over. You can see what a beautiful shape she has, beautiful, beautiful lines on that vessel. That's the way they're building these fishing vessels out of Gloucester. Captain John Foss, give us a wave there, Captain Foss. You got your hat there. Wave that hat back and forth. The schooner American Eagle, welcome to Rockland Harbor. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! And blasting up behind her, coming along with a great bone in her teeth, is the schooner Stephen Tabor. She's sliding along there. She's like some kind of a sled on ice, that old thing. Look at her go. No, you're going to burn the paint right off the bottom of her. Here comes a comfortable little cruising boat. She looks like she's making a home for somebody, doesn't she? She's got an old looking, old style about her. So we were naming the masts of a vessel, naming the masts on the Thomas Lawson 7-masted schooner, the 4 main mizzen jigger driver pusher spanker. The Thomas Lawson, the biggest vessel ever, biggest sailing vessel ever built, the biggest schooner ever built with 7 masts. The biggest wooden schooner ever built was the mighty Wyoming. She was built in Bath about 1910. She was so big, but she was not very long lasting. those poor vessels, as I say, they were so big, they chewed their oakum out, and they strained those vessels terribly by carrying very heavy cargo in them. So it wasn't too successful building these 6-masted schooners. And the biggest vessel built in Rockland was the 6-masted called the Murdy Crowley. She was built right over on Sandy Beach over there in Rockland. And she was a huge schooner. But there again, she carried coal. She was a collier. And those vessels carried such heavy cargo that it was very hard to keep them going. One of the most notorious vessels built in Rockland was the clipper ship Red Jacket. The extreme clipper Red Jacket. She was built right over, well, where the apprentice shop is in the north end of Rockland, back in 1853. The Red Jacket was named for an Indian, notorious Indian at that time, who had a red coat. And the Red Jacket, built in 1853, she was known as the fastest clipper ever built. And she sailed from Rockland down to New York to load her cargo. She got her cargo together, and then she sailed from New York to Liverpool, England, and she did it in 13 days and 1 hour. That in 1853 was rocket science. Built right here in Rockland, Maine, the Red Jacket was known all over the world as the fastest clipper ever. No vessel, even to this day, has ever crossed the Atlantic. No vessel of the same breed of cat, I should say, the same kind of vessel, that is a big clipper ship, ever beat her time. Her time has been beaten by odd vessels such as catamarans or trimarans, or a different kind of animal. But for a big old vessel like that, the Red Jacket was the all-time winner of transatlantic. The British took one look at the Red Jacket, and they were so enamored by that vessel when she sailed up the Mersey River up into Liverpool that they bought her on the spot. As a matter of fact, when she sailed up into Liverpool, she had a fair breeze of wind, and the Red Jacket was going so fast the tugboats tried to catch her and put a line on her to dock her, and they couldn't catch her. So the captain took him right up in there, and he rounded that vessel up, backed her squaresails, and laid her alongside the dock, and everybody cheered. The Red Jacket, amazing ship. She sailed many years after that all over the world, down to Australia and the Oriental trade and so on. Lived a long time, lived 38 years. That's a long time for a clipper ship. What's the difference between a clipper ship and a schooner? Well, there's a vast difference. Clipper ships, the real clipper ships, were made only in 2 years. In 1850 to 1852, the real extreme clipper ships were built. Donald Mackay built the most of them. He built the Flying Cloud and the Lightning and the Sovereign of the Seas and the Staghound. All those amazing clippers that went around in the California Gold Rush days. Went around Cape Horn. They were amazing vessels because, of course, they were so swift, but they were swift because they compromised. They made them very narrow, they made them very lean, so that they would go very fast. They were only interested in getting people out for the gold rush, and then they would throw them away. Well, in 1853, when they built the Red Jacket was built a little more buxom, a little more full, so that she'd carry a little more cargo. But she still was what they would call an extreme clipper, built right here on the north end of Rockland. Clipper ships usually were 3-masted, square-rigged vessels. Schooner rig, of course, the schooner rig that we look at here, all of these boats, their sails are more or less in line with their keel. But the clipper ships, the square-rigged vessels, they had square sails that went across the ship, crossing over the opposite direction of their keel on yard arms. And these clipper ships were all 3-masted vessels, square-rigged on every mast. It would take a long time to describe all of the different rigs and rigging of clipper ships and square-rigged vessels. You'd be yawning, I can tell you that, by the time I got to the end of the dissertation. But to make it quick, these clipper ships of 3-masted vessels square-rigged on all 3 masts. They had 4-masted and 5-masted vessels that were square-rigged vessels, but it was a more rare thing. But there were brigs and brigantines, and there were barks and barkentines, and all different kinds of rigs of square-rigged vessels back in the old days. Those vessels are pretty much gone except